welcome back to Cooking the Books with me, Gilly Smith, the podcast which takes us through 4 food moments from the books of our favourite food writers. It's about life through the prism of food. And this week we're talking to friend of the show, Mark Diacono, about his latest book, Vegetables.
If you taste it without knowing, you go, that's nutmeg ice cream. That's nutmeg ice cream. And then right at the end, there's this kind of gorgeous, earthy sweetness. And it's quite hard to put your finger on it. Whereas if you tell people it's parsnip and nutmeg ice cream, they're going, oh my God, that's parsnip. It's parsnip. Oh, there's some nutmeg too. So it's really odd what our brains tell us.
This is a book packed with ideas about how to get more food from the land, a journey through the seasons which Ottolenghi calls simple, soulful, seasonal, B. Wilson calls joyful, and Julius Roberts says is an inspiring veg Bible. But for a gardener like Mark, how did he feel about the king of growing, Monty Don, calling it a wonderful book, something truly inspiring and beautiful?
Isn't that great? Monty is one of the reasons that I grow anything. Years ago, when I started getting the bug for it, he had his column going on in the Observer, and it was one of those things that made me realise that it wasn't this thing of gardening. I've got this deep memory of when I was a kid, walking into the front room, my mum's watching Gardener's World, really, really deep memory, thinking, if I ever get into this, somebody hit me over the head with a spade, because I would have ascended into deep middle age. And then I started reading, Monty's words when I was just getting into it. And I found them really inspiring because it really felt like gardening, growing a bit of your own food was, I made that connection with it being about more than something to do, than just getting the food. And I got to know him over the years, and I send him a book every now and again, and he, emails back and says, thank you very much, it's very nice of you, I enjoyed it. And this is the first time I've asked him, give me a quote, because the world must ask Monty, and he rarely does it. And he's been really, hugely generous. And that was a very special thing, because I'm not sure I'd be writing if it wasn't for a couple of people, and he most certainly is one of them.
Who's the other one?
Diana Henry, for sure. Again, that thing of writing being an expression of your whole self, even if you're just writing about custard, I think is a really brilliant thing. Those two most certainly. Nigel Slater, I think, obviously it's not peculiar to have found Nigel's writing amazing. Jane Grigson, I think my desert island books, never mind food books, my desert island books would be Jane Grigson's vegetable book and her fruit book. And again, just that weaving of life into food, and making those connections. I would say those 4 were really the big ones for me.
Yeah. I mean, it is about stories with you, isn't it? That you are a great storyteller. You can take a bit of pepper and tell a great anecdote about it. How much more difficult is it to do it with purely vegetables? That's
a really interesting question, because this, really food is a way of me writing about what I want to write about, but I think that's the case with most people. And it's interesting with this book because, previously I've written, always connected to food. And this one is probably more of a direct connection between the ingredient and the reader, if you see what I mean. But my job here, and heaven's sake, it is still full of me, but maybe slightly less so than normal, in terms of, stories and whatever else, is, this. I want this to be more of a direct communication between what I've found over years, a quarter of a century of growing food, eating it absolutely in perfect season, and making the best of it in as simple a way as I could, because that whole thing for me, the flavour and the joy of eating good food, is kind of what got me into the writing about it. So I'm hoping that by making some of these recipes, people will kind of get a sense of that pleasure, and maybe kind of find a deeper way into their relationship with food, as well as having, a gorgeous tea.
It's interesting because I love your books and I love your writing, and I read a lot of what you write. And I noticed very, very quickly in this book that it's not your usual style. And I notice also, because I have a pile of books about vegetables, so many that I have a slush pile of vegetable books that I literally haven't got room for on the show. And I am disappointing a lot of new authors because of the amount of vegetable books that are coming my way. And most of them, I have to say, are about persuading people to eat more vegetables, and that is brilliant. That is very much part of the Henry Dimbleby school of thought. You know, I work for the Food Foundation. We're all about eating more vegetables and less meat, and how to do that brilliantly and beautifully. But everyone, including you, are sort of luring us, to seducing us with all these ideas as if we're not eating enough vegetables, which we're not. But it means that there are not those childhood kitchen stories, the stories of your mum and dad and your grandpa and, you know, all that stuff that we know you for. There are still some musical anecdotes, thank God. But it's just so interesting. And I wonder if you were aware of that, whether all you vegetable writers get together and say, look, come on, we've got to do this quickly, otherwise the planet is going to burn and we're all going to be obese and die.
No, you know what? It was. It felt really a real pleasure, actually. And don't get me wrong, I love writing about all the things that occur to me sideways when I'm making an omelette or something. But I wanted to make it really, really recipe heavy. You know, this is a hard-working book to pick up on a wet Tuesday night in February and answer the question, you know, what am I going to do with these two celeriac that are in the fridge? You know, that I wanted it to be a kind of very direct communication. I write constantly, as you know, Substack and all my other books, with distraction and sidewaysness, and I really enjoy that, and I think people have, like that part of me too. But I can do this very simply, and I wanted to do that. It was a challenge in lots of ways when I write in, I wanted it to take out a bit more of the length of me writing and include another 20 recipes, include lots of variations. You know, this is a book. I mean, and as you say, there are many vegetable books around. There always have been. You know, that there's so much of that around, but it is having a moment. But they're different, characterful, and brilliant. And the thing with veg-heavy books is they take everyone with them. You know, so this one, there's no meat in it. That's great. If you like meat, add some. Have it on the side. Do whatever you want with it. If you are have any dietaries, if you eat only, plant-based food, exactly the same here. But, Georgie Hayden's brilliant new book, it couldn't be more different to mine. And that's the lovely thing. These are all kind of distinct. But yes, you're right. This is very much recipe driven. It's very much like I want to communicate with you so many recipes that will make life delicious, easy, seasonal, and therefore cheap, and it was a real joy of a challenge to do.
It takes you back to the kind of the essential Mark Diacono, you use the phrase treading more lightly on the planet, your river cottage, your otter farm heritage. You've always been the man who grows his own vegetables for a start. It's back to putting the spade in the land, isn't it? You do encourage us to grow as well. It is about connection with the land. I mean, how important for you personally is that message?
It's really, really crucial. My previous life to writing and growing lots of food was as an environmental consultant. I did a master's. I worked and set up my own environmental consultancy, used to advise government about managing the landscape and countryside and so on. So it's always been at the heart of what I do. But I think the personal connection was really huge. When I started growing a little of my own food, life went from when I lived in London, there being two seasons, cold and wet and dry and sunny, to, many interseasons, kind of 10, 12 kind of recognisable parts of the year. And growing a bit of food kind of cemented a lot of that. It gave kind of meaning to different parts of the year, but also that connection between myself and those few centimetres of soil, that keep us alive on this planet, got so much deeper. So it became very much part of the same language, I guess. And it's interesting with this book because it is, in so many ways, I guess, like my year at Otter Farm, like the River Cottage Veg Patch book, but without the actual growing bit, because, I've written about that plenty. It's easy to find the spacing for broad beans, but what maybe is more important now for more people is, what do I do with the broad beans, for God's sake? I might have bought them. The whole thing I want is there to be an implication that you've come in from outside in the garden, even if the garden happens to be at the supermarket. And what are you going to do with this gorgeousness? Because you can join this spectrum of plot to platedness at any point along the way. And this really is just taking you from having stepped in the house wherever you've got your gorgeous food from.
Yeah. Full of tips, the seasonal swaps, the zero waste, the back of the fridge cooking. That conversation has changed. I mean, I remember probably even 2 or 3 years ago, it was all about batch cooking, and that was about saving time. You know, we're so busy, you know, let's buy lots of stuff from the supermarket because we haven't got time to cook. That was always a big fat lie by the food industry as far as I'm concerned. Now we are talking about zero waste. We're talking about not putting so much in landfill. We're talking about, you know, buying smart because of the cost of living crisis, because we need to eat more healthily, but also because we're saving the planet. And that conversation appears to me to have changed. You have a big Substack community. You've got a big Instagram community. How has the conversation changed as far as you're concerned from the people who follow you?
It's really interesting. I think you're right. We're in grave danger of being sort of led around by the nose by one of the tentacles of an octopus of sustainability. You know, this week it'll be waste, next week it'll be whatever, food miles, next week it'll be something else. And actually, you know, you can spend all your time and energy kind of focusing on one, and the shortcut to it is to stay at the heart of the thing, you know, not be too distracted. And I think that people have really, my experience of that is make food a pleasure, you know, make it so that it's really possible and easy to eat delicious food that's cheap, that's in season, all of that, and get the joy out of it. And some of that is, you know, just as simple as showing people what to do with, I don't know, turnips, things that people don't know how to handle and what to do with, but they would like maybe to broaden up their range of cooking. Now, if you can do that really simply and really pleasurably, then people enjoy that because you're changing their life in a really small but measurable way. You know, if a real example of that is like, give me a really nice coffee, one a day, I'm a happy man. Do you know what I mean? My resting mood has lifted. One simple tiny thing, and I think that's really, really important. Is just to make that possible, and that's what I try and do. And I think that's what people enjoy. It's just that thing. What can I do with it? How do I make it at its best? Make me into a good cook without me having to dedicate my life to it. And that is actually really, really, really very simple.
Yeah. It's about waking up to the vegetables that we've known all our lives, but going, yeah, it's asparagus. Oh, my God, a little bit of lovely butter. Burnt butter, maybe even. You know, celeriac, roast it. Oh, my goodness, caramelising from the inside. Who knew? It's that, isn't it? But
it's absolutely that.
Do tell me about parsnip and nutmeg ice cream. Never seen that before.
No, honestly, I've made a few things with parsnip, but you know, everyone's happy with carrot cake, and I've made a few gorgeous things with parsnip in the past. You know, including parsnip cake, where it's differently spiced to a carrot cake, but you know, using that same kind of principle that they are sweet and joyous and delightful, but that little bit of earthiness. And I had an idea that parsnip and nutmeg ice cream would work together because parsnip and nutmeg work so gorgeously when you roast the parsnips. I thought I'd have to tweak it to death. I made a really simple ice cream with, you know, half a kilo of parsnips and a couple of tins of coconut milk and a bit of sugar and a great deal of nutmeg. The secret is a great deal of nutmeg, egg yolks. And it's just, if you taste it without knowing, you go, that's nutmeg ice cream. That's nutmeg ice cream. And then right at the end, there's this kind of gorgeous earthy sweetness. And it's quite hard to put your finger on it. Whereas if you tell people it's parsnip and nutmeg ice cream, they're going, oh my God, that's parsnip. It's parsnip. Oh, there's some nutmeg too. So it's really odd what our brains tell us about what we're about to eat and what we can tell ourselves if we don't know it. It is a really extraordinary ice cream. My father-in-law, who is not a man given to high praise or exuberance on those sorts of front. He absolutely loves it, and he's definitely a crumble and custard kind of a guy. So yeah, don't be afraid of the parsnip and nutmeg ice cream. Honestly, it is one of my great favourites, and it was very simple. Just, you know, it didn't need a lot of tweaking. It was just wonderful.
Did he like the tomato crumble?
The tomato crumble, I've not run past him yet. I'm going in instalments, all right, Gilly? I'm going to go in gentle instalments. It's really interesting, that one, because the tomatoes and plums, they just work. And where that came from is that I was trying, I was just making a different version of a panzanella, you know, and I had fewer tomatoes than I thought, and I had some plums, so I made it, and it worked. And I got to thinking next time when I made plum crumble, I wonder if we take some tomatoes, and often, you know, they enjoy a little bit of cooking. The only thing you have to do with that to make it extraordinary is to just drain off a little of the liquid, because obviously tomatoes are kind of very liquidy. But that's what you do before you kind of get the crumble on top. It's really good, I promise.
What does your daughter say? She's what? She's 14?
She's 18, God's sake.
She's 18?
I know,
God,
extraordinary.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
What does she say? I presume she has more sophisticated tastes now, does she?
Well, honestly, if if my daughter would be extremely happy if I gave her some form of fried potato 3 times a day with something else next to it that she had to eat, she'd be perfectly happy. But yeah, you know, she's again, that ice cream she really loves. I'm not sure if she's eaten the crumble. She was away that week, I think. But yeah, she's good. She'll try anything, and she'll be. She's mostly complimentary. Mostly.
Let's go through your food moments. Watercress soup. Now, this is simple.
Yeah.
We know this absolutely. I mean, of all the really interesting combinations that you've got in the book, and really kind of pushing the boat on what to do with the vegetable, why did you choose watercress soup?
It's one of the things. Anything so many things I make they end up having a connection with something else, even if it's just what comes to mind when I'm making it. And my parents-in-law used to live in Hampshire, not far from Winchester, where funnily enough, I used to live. And not far from there is a whole kind of network of gorgeous chalk rivers and perfect place to be growing watercress. And funnily enough, when Nell was born, and we used to go up and visit and stayed at the weekends and all of that stuff, often we would be walking, you know, her in a pram, pushing around, you know, desperately trying to get her to sleep so that we might get some around these gorgeous watercress beds. And it reminds me really very much of, that time when my daughter was, you know, newly born, those weekends and other times with the parents-in-law in a landscape I already knew, from living in Winchester when I did a degree and stuff, and all the kind of the scent of apple wood in the city and the hoppy ales that the countryside kind of around there seems to make spring up, and just those gin clear, gorgeous, you know, chalk streams. So all of it very much connects. So whenever I'm making that soup, it's really unusual for me not to be thinking of those times and those people, you know.
Yeah, and I made an episode of a delicious podcast about the watercress down there, which was made into gin. You sent me a little note saying the taste of a place, of a landscape, of somewhere very dear to me. Firstly, is the place I realised I might wake up and have some direction, where I fell in love and made some of the closest, dearest friends I have, and where I met me wife. You go on. You don't write that in the book, though. It's beautiful what you write. The stuff, hoppy ales in the countryside pubs, the walks to catch the steam train going under the bridge with my young daughter, all attached to the sight and flavour of watercress. I mean, I feel incredibly honoured to have this bit of Mark Diacono writing that is nowhere else. But why don't you write like that in the book? That's more like what I meant by the childhood kitchens, which I found missing in this book.
Yeah, it's interesting. This is the great trouble. My editor should be paid a lot more money than she is. I mean, she's an absolute marvel. But I have always got words to say, you know, and that's the thing. I think I just wanted this to reach more people. I think people who've already got any of my other books know that, you know, I like to write. You know, often the recipe is a kind of punchline to a long joke, whereas I wanted this to be punchlines. I wanted it to be useful. I wanted to, if I put more of me writing at length, then there are going to be fewer recipes, you know, and I just wanted it to be absolutely stacked full of really lovely, nutritious, delicious recipes that you can make a friend of once and then tweak to any season. Other ingredients, there's lots of suggestions for that. So it really was that thing of like, it came from, what do you want this book to be? You know, what do you want this book to be? I want this book to be a really hard-working answer to all those things that people who maybe are either really good cooks and want some good ideas, or people who are taking a step into the world of cooking more for themselves and want to eat more veg heavy stuff. So that's all it is. I haven't stopped writing at great length and with sidestepped into the past, into the future, and as you say, musical anecdotes. There's going to be a whole world of that in the next book. There's a whole world of that on my Substack. It's just that this job was very different. And it was a job I set myself. I've never been under any pressure to write in this way. I wanted to just write more recipes. And, there's still plenty of character in the intros. But rather than the intros actually being 90% of what you read, they're a little bit shorter.
Well, then let me read what you wrote me for your cauliflower, new potato and caraway hominy pie. The head notes in that are absolutely perfect and reference the Crank's cookbook, but you write to me. My teens and early 20s were consumed by music and what was happening at the weekend, an oddly happy time in an excellent company, but also putting myself in the collapsed tent of the relationship with my old man and quietly dealing with panic attacks. We've heard about those in our previous chat with you on Cooking the Books. Music was everything, the way I imagined a world beyond my own and much more, literally a lifesaver. This was a time of house shares, sleeping on friends' floors, etc. And one friend's mum was obsessed with the Crank's cookbook, turning out recipe after recipe. We'd tasted nothing like it. The local health food shop sold similar, but this was the food we made if we weren't tucking into a bean feast or some other atrocity. I love it. Tell me about this recipe, the cauliflower, new potato and caraway hominy pie.
Well, I tell you what, the base recipe, as in the first time I ever made hominy pie, was from that Crank's cookbook. And there were probably 5 or 6 of us who literally never cooked anything. It would, cheese on toast and these awful bean feasty ready meal things when we were first living away from home and on each other's floors and whatever else. And just what's the next gig? Who are we going to see next? And this is what we started cooking. And it couldn't have been simpler. And oddly, it was, really kind of lovely. And for a very short time, we thought we could cook. And this, I wanted to include it because it felt like my introduction to vegetarian cooking, My dad was no great cook. My mum and my sister left when I was 9-ish, 10-ish. And, hey, he did as good a job as he could. I make no complaints. But this felt like something else. And it felt like, oh, my God, food can be really something. I wanted to turn it into something more relevant to now. So the pastry is, really delightful pastry, but the caraway seeds really set off everything else in it. The filling is cauliflower and new potato. It has got the cheddar in it. It's got the cream in it. It's got the onion in it as well. But I wanted it to be something that you could A, make a friend of, B, have this exactly as it is, or C, go, hang on a minute, I could use something else instead of the cauliflower. I could use something else instead of the potatoes. I've made a friend of this kind of core recipe and something that maybe you could take on and make your own. And that's where it came from all of those interesting evenings that end up on somebody else's floor after seeing a band. And they remind me of Space Dust and Limeade.
Yeah, and takes a lot of people back, I'm sure. Your third food moment is the aubergine kedgeree. Again, you give me a wonderful little insight to this one, so I'm going to read it. A quarter of a century ago, in a previous life, I ran a consultancy advising government agencies about managing the landscape, a framework for planning everything from farm payments to nature conservation initiatives on a national and regional level. What a great job. We'd derived a new method that the Welsh Government were keen on, and we had to present it at 9:30 in a hotel, a 6.5-hour drive from where a colleague and I lived in Whitstable. We woke early, drove like the wind, and got there with 20 minutes to spare, having had no breaks. The concierge directed us to the dining room, where we hoped for a coffee and a limp pastry. What would you like, sir? In a perfect dream world, it would be smoked haddock kedgeree with 2 poached eggs and an excellent coffee, but I'll take whatever you have. A few minutes later, he produced the perfect kedgeree with the perfect eggs and the perfect coffee. I don't think I've ever been as hungry, nor eaten anything that so perfectly rectified it. And in almost all situations since, I will choose kedgeree if it's on the menu. This recipe is my attempt of recapturing that moment, that magic of that Snowdonian kedgeree without fish.
Honestly, I can still taste it. If you've ever seen that scene in Ice Cold in Alex, where they neck the very cold bottle of beer and it's perspiring and it's just like, ugh, this was the food equivalent for me. It couldn't have been a better interpretation of exactly what I most wanted in that minute. Having been petrified for 6.5 hours by the rather competitive nature of my friend's driving, from Whitstable in the far reaches of Kent up to Snowdonia, in the dead of night and into dawn. We got there in bits, and that really revived, refreshed, and everything. And I've loved kedgeree ever since. I've realised a bit like having an extraordinary risotto. When you've had something that you're so familiar with, but it's taken somewhere else, you can't come back from the somewhere else. And the recipe in the book, I wanted to make a meat-free version, and the smoky joyfulness of aubergines works so well in place of what ordinarily might be the smoky fish. But yeah, again, a great moment where you're going, okay, now I see what it can be.
You do say that you will completely splatter your kitchen in molten aubergine flesh if you put them directly on the gas hob, which is what most people do, a lot of people do all over the Middle East for a start. What does it add to it, that kind of charring, smoking flavour?
Oh, man. What it does is it takes you outside. You're effectively saying, right, I'm going to burn this thing to within an inch of its life. I'm even prepared to clear up whatever leaks out of it should it burst, or should it just split a little, because it gives me the flavour of being outside in the coals. Now, I would do this outside in the coals, but I'm no one's fool. I'm not going to go out there and just fire up something for the sake of 2 aubergines. I know there are many people who do, but that's not me. And it's certainly not me on a drizzly summer evening where I might want to eat this. So I do it on the hob. And it just, like I say, it brings the flavour of outside. It's got that sense of burnt, smoky, intense. I've been turned by the intensity of this relationship with the hob into something that's really very different, and it is just joyous.
Your final food moment is the radicchio and the chestnut risotto. What I want you to tell me about here, you've said in the head notes, you accidentally ate risotto made by Raymond Blanc, and a little asterisk saying, I won't bore you with the story. Please do.
That was one of the great days. I was photographing a load of gardens, interesting gardens for somebody else's book, and one of them we were going to do was at the Manoir, and I emailed Raymond's assistant and said, look, is there any chance that I could just have a picture of Raymond in the garden, because then that's going to suit the book perfectly, it's going to fit beautifully, we'll do it on a spread, it'll be brilliant. She said, you've got 3 minutes with him, 9:27, meet him in the foyer. So I've driven up from Devon, left at silly o'clock, and got there at 9:10. I've walked in the foyer, and there's Raymond Blanc. He's sat in a chair, and he's reading my year at Otter Farm. He's reading my book. And I'm like, good heavens. And he was like, I didn't realise, you're obsessed like me. You're obsessed like me. I didn't realise. You didn't realise. And come with me. So into the gardens, the whole tour. We're walking around the place, everything. And, and then he's like, come back in, we have a coffee, we're having a bit more of a chat. And all the time I'm going, Raymond, can I just take your picture? This is the best thing in the world. But if I don't get the picture. So anyway, I get the picture. I walk around a little bit more. And we're supposed to be in North Wales. We're supposed to be in North Wales shooting the next garden. And I'm texting the woman saying, oh, traffic's dreadful, it's awful. He said, you've got to stay for lunch. I'm like, Raymond Blanc's cooking me lunch. And he made this spring into summer risotto. There are 3 meals in my life where I've put my knife and fork down and not wanted to continue for fear of finishing it, for it being over. And I didn't believe that it was possible for risotto to be so extraordinary. I just didn't believe it was possible. Because what is it? some kind of liquid. It's rice, and whatever you. And he made that with water. There wasn't even stock, and it was just the best of the garden in that day. And I have never tasted anything quite like it. And it was like your least favourite band coming up with your favourite song. It was just, I couldn't believe that risotto could be like this. And I ate it genuinely with kind of misty eyes. And I remember driving home after, finally getting all the other images that I needed to get in the day, and thinking, when I die, if I get half an hour lying there, pain-free, to think about amazing things that have happened, as dozy as it sounds, that risotto will definitely pass through my mind. It was just an extraordinary lesson in how simplicity, right now, from garden to plate, can lift and change your day, your life. It was just extraordinary. And I've been chasing the ability to cook a risotto that even registers on the same scale as that ever since. And it really was just an extraordinary thing.
Thanks for listening. Head over to my Substack for extra bites of Mark Diacono, and I'll see you next week.